Thanks for listening to the Media People podcast, lively and insightful chats with the people who power the media industry. I'm your host, Victor Genova. For more episodes, you can go to mediapeople.ca or subscribe wherever you get podcasts. Views expressed by participants are personal. Think managing media in a country with 2 national languages can be complicated? Try handling media and marketing in India, a country with over 1.3 billion people, a number of languages and dialects, and a variety of cultural nuances that need to be accounted for. But that's only one of the many pieces that make up the life and career of today's guest, Maz Tannir. Born in Lebanon, Maz's father moved his family to Oman in order to escape the war that was happening at home. After high school, Maz moved to Cyprus to study business at Cyprus College. But while most students enter the workforce after graduation, Maz relocated to England to study acting. Maz eventually returned to Oman, taking a role at OHI, an agency now part of the DDB network. From there, opportunities to work both agency and client side took him to Dubai, Morocco, and India, just to name a few. Maz Tannir stops by to chat about his early life, studying theater in the United Kingdom, the differences between agency life in Dubai and Oman, emigrating with his family to Canada, and the importance of giving back to the media industry.
WS was set up about 19 years ago. I think we just celebrated our 19th anniversary to focus on the agriculture, marketing, and animal health industry across North America. And we've been going really strong. We've got some incredible clients, some of them have been with us right from the beginning, actually. My role, and I wear several hats at the company. I do take it very personally, this particular job. I'm in charge of all the media. So to begin there, I'm responsible for running campaigns across North America, working with clients to introduce them to more digital solutions and tools, finding good, strong data that we can use to, for our audience, as well as running the communications department. So I have the performance team, so the analytics, the performance, the measurement, as well as the content team. So anything to do with blogs, social media, and the likes of that. So that's all under my team that I'm very fortunate to manage at WS.
Let's go back to the beginning. Where are you from?
So originally born in Beirut, Lebanon. I won't tell you what year because that's going to age me completely.
That's okay.
But my father left first, didn't leave us. He left the country in pursuit of something a bit safer for us. The war had broken out in Beirut, and he trekked across the Middle East to a country called Oman, the Sultanate of Oman. And soon after that, my mother, brother, sister, myself, we made our way there and joined him. And that's really where I was raised. I was raised in Oman. For those who aren't sure where that is, you've probably heard of Dubai. So Dubai is a 4-hour drive from Oman. So between Dubai and Oman, we pretty much grew up there. Did my college studies in Cyprus, and then I moved to England, then back to Oman and back to Dubai, and I just kept moving around after that. But the main place was born in Beirut and raised in Oman.
What made your father pick Oman? Because there are a number of countries he could have picked in, I guess, the Middle East or Asia, but he chose that one.
So at the time, when the war was going on in Beirut, I think a lot of it had to do with accessibility, where he can get to at that time, based on his qualifications. He wanted somewhere much more quiet. Oman was still in its growth phase. It hadn't peaked the way it is today. And he just felt that would be a very safe, comfortable place for all of us to go after living in a war. So yeah, and it's part of what's referred to as the Gulf region. So once you're in one of them, you can easily move around and access the other countries. But I'm so glad he did it, because Oman turned out to be just a beautiful place to grow up in, and very peaceful, and um, the generosity of the local people there is just incredible.
If you don't mind me asking, what was life like growing up? Or I know it only happened for a couple of years, or maybe even less than that, growing up in a country that was at war, because that's a very topical thing right now, because a lot of focus is on the Ukraine and the Russian invasion and what's going on with the Ukrainians that are still on the ground. Because when you think about it, it's kind of like the very first war to be captured on social media. Like social media was around for other conflicts, but this seems to be at the right time when the infrastructure has matured, the platforms are there, so you can readily get the video up there. Everyone has a smartphone. It's kind of like a perfect storm for getting that information out. So tell us a little bit about, what it was like for you in Beirut with, fighter planes up ahead and bombs coming down. Like, how did you go about your day?
So every summer, even after we had moved to Oman, we'd go back to Beirut. I don't know why. I guess my parents were missing their family, and I understand that. But we would travel to Cyprus and then take a boat overnight to get to Beirut, because that was the safest way in, because the airport was always either being bombed or being shut. It was horrifying, to be honest. I still, even at this age, I still don't like fireworks, to be honest with you. And, and it's because it reminds you of those horrible sounds. You'd be standing at a balcony, and then a siren would come out, and that meant you all had to go down to the bunker, and you would sleep there. And buildings would vanish overnight. Uh, there's really nothing positive to say about it. It's a horrifying experience. I'm watching the news, and you're right. Today, with the way that social media covers things, we're seeing a lot more um, happening in Ukraine than people would have seen in other wars, the Gulf War, or the war in Beirut, or wars in other countries around the world. But believe me, you don't forget anything you see. It sticks with you for the rest of your life. All the carnage that it causes, the deaths, the bodies. It's just a very uncomfortable place to be around.
Well, look, I'm glad your family got out of there and they're safe now.
Me
But
too.
let's talk about your interests or hobbies. Like, what was keeping you busy or occupied when you were growing up?
I have a passion for football, or soccer, as it's called here. That was always a thing for us. We would go out and play every single day, no matter what the weather was, and it's quite warm weather over there, so you're never dealing with snow. But football for me was something that I absolutely loved doing. My brother and my sister eventually moved out, because when you're living in Oman, if you wanted to study and you're not a local, you have to go abroad to study. So my brother was studying in England, and he was living in a boarding school. My sister eventually moved to the States, and they would come back, and they would bring all their music with them. And so from a very early age, I was exposed to some incredible music that my brother would bring in, and my sister would bring along from the US. And so that became a hobby of mine, just listening to the tracks, reading the album covers, understanding, who's involved, what are the different aspects, that it takes to build an album. This is well before music videos. And at school, we had to participate in all the sports. So we were playing tennis and volleyball. It was a very sports based life. Um, and as we got older, interests obviously changed, and I got more into cars and car racing. So I consider myself a big fan of Formula One. Um, but these are interests that have grown with me, and so until today, I watch as many soccer games as I possibly can. I will go and watch games at BMO Field in Hamilton with the Canadian men's national team. I haven't missed a Formula One race in I don't know how long. So these are things that sort of stuck with me over the years.
Okay, so your favorite football team, you got to throw that out there. Who do you
Chelsea,
support?
Chelsea
Chel-
till I die.
Well, they're up for sale. You've
I know.
got to spare billions kicking around.
I know. I checked my bank account this morning. I'm not quite there yet, unfortunately.
I'm sure there's a supporters trust where millions of people could pitch in and acquire it from Roman Abramovich.
Yeah.
Okay, so who's your favorite Formula One driver, or at least who's your favorite driver? And if they're different, let's say they're a retired driver, who's your pick for the 2022 championship? Because all bets are off this year.
All bets are off this year. Last year and for the last couple of years, I've really been enjoying the way Daniel Ricciardo drives. I'm not a Hamilton fan. I know he's an exceptional driver, so I'm not saying he's not good. But for me, just the attitude that Daniel Ricciardo brings to the race, his overtaking methods, I've really been, watching him very closely and following him. I was delighted when he moved to McLaren. I thought that car would match him perfectly, and hopefully this year is going to be a much better year for him. We're going to see him on more podiums doing the shoey.
I think McLaren is going to be at the very least the third best team this year.
Amen to that.
And I agree with you on Daniel Ricciardo's attitude. I'm a fan of his as well. And I don't know if you've seen this meme. It's floating around Instagram. It's going back a couple years, but it's the God, what is it? It's the Formula One video game cover, and he's the only one smiling. Everyone's got that kind of like stern superhero face, and then he's off to the side with a big grin.
Yeah, no, he's made it very interesting. I think he plays a big role. I know Netflix has done incredible things for the race and gaining its popularity around the world, but I think he makes it a lot easier for people to associate with it, and he brings out the jokes, and I think that's quite necessary for the sport.
It's definitely not as rigid as it was in the 90s. Like if you had Netflix back in the 90s and they tried to cover it, I don't think you'd get. I think literally Eddie Irvine would be the only one you get any content out of.
Yeah, it's become a lot more entertaining. There's a lot more politics involved. That you see these dynamics between racers and teams and their management. There's a lot of great things happening in Formula One. I still enjoy it thoroughly. I'm going to the Canadian one again this year. I've got my tickets secured and hoping to make it down to the Austin one too.
Well, Netflix did make Gunther Steiner a star.
He is, isn't he?
Why do you credit your dad with being your biggest influence?
Oh, my dad. I immigrated to Canada in 2005. I left everything behind. I had a really great life, but I wanted something better for my children. And that's why we immigrated here. And when I look back and say, why did I do that? Or what gave me that confidence? I always think of my father, that in the middle of a war where money is really tight and everyone is either giving in or joining the war or taking a political side, he said, no, I'm packing up. I'm going to go get everything set up and ready in a foreign country where I don't know anybody. And I'm going to give my kids the best that I can possibly do. And I respect it so much. And when I ended up coming here, I remember speaking to him. He goes, he's like, oh my God, you left us. You've just gone to the other side of the world with your children and your partner. And I said, well, you influenced that. This is all because of you. You made that move. You sacrificed for your children. And that's what I want to be doing for mine. So I think of him that he's a hero for showing us that you can do this no matter what stage of your life that you're in. You can go and achieve for things that are better for you and your loved ones. So yeah, I will always look at my father as a hero in that point.
The fact that he picked up the family and he moved you guys to Oman, did that make it easier for you to emigrate other places in the world, like your time in England and Canada as well? Like, I'm not suggesting there wasn't some element of culture shock when you landed and things to get adjusted to, but I have to imagine, looking back at it, it was significantly easier than it would have been had you never left Beirut and that was your first move, either going to England or going to Canada.
I see a lot of people that have come here directly from Beirut, people who lived through the war and then they got to a point where they just had to leave. And I find them having a harder time adjusting in Canada. And I think the fact that we've always lived in a country where we were considered foreigners helped us in a lot of ways. You know, my brother at a very early age packed up, moved to England all on his own, lived in a boarding school and studied and grew to become the economist that he is today. My sister did the same thing. It just became a way of life for us to understand that we can move. Nothing has to hold us back, if you will. So
You
I don't regret the decision of coming here. It was really hard to begin with, really, really hard. But you know, I look back at it today and I understand that a lot of the things that we've achieved were worth it. You know, it made everything worth it.
Maz, talk to us about your first job, because there was a bit of a twist with this. It could actually be an official job, even though it was your job.
So, as a foreigner in Oman, you're not allowed to work unless you have a work permit. And so, a friend hooked me up. His parents own some corporate office, and we were talking snail mail here, if I'm allowed to still say that term. But I would go around with a trolley, and this company used to get tons of letters. I don't even remember what they did. But this was basically me walking around with a trolley, handing out mail because I wanted more than the allowance my parents were giving me. So that was the only way to do it, and I would get paid in cash at the end of the week. And if the owner didn't have the right amount of change in his pocket, I'd get a little bit extra because I could never break
Nice.
I could never break a 50, you know.
Oh, rounding up works to your advantage. That's
Exactly,
good.
yeah. Always round up.
What brought you to Cyprus College, and what did you study there?
I started off doing hotel management, then I shifted into business. Cyprus was very familiar with us, especially as Lebanese people, because it's so close to Beirut. And so we would always use Cyprus as a middle ground to get from Oman, let's say, or Dubai into Beirut, right? We would take the ferry overnight. So we were all very familiar with Cyprus. And I know a lot of people don't think of Cyprus and think of colleges and education. They only think of the beaches, which were also wonderful, by the way. But it wasn't as expensive for me to study in Cyprus as it would have been for me to go to England or the United States, like my siblings had done. So we decided on Cyprus. It was close to Beirut, so I can hop in and out of there if I ever needed to. I wasn't too shabby at playing football, so I got a bit of some support through playing for the local for the college team, and then with another club. But it was really almost a second home for us after Beirut, to be in Cyprus, and I had a great time there. And eventually, you know, you go from playing and being trying to be an athlete to understanding that, hey, there's a lot more things a college student can do by the beach. So
That's for sure.
attention shifted a little bit. But yeah, that's really why I got to Cyprus, and why it's so close to the heart.
You continued your studies after college, or after Cyprus College, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is where you packed up and you moved to England. And was it, tell me if I get the name wrong, ARTTS International?
Arts, yeah.
Arts. Oh God. I didn't even pick that up. We
Yeah.
live in a world where everyone's dropping vowels
Yeah.
from names, and they're like, that's the new startup that's going to be a unicorn because it's missing
Yeah.
vowels from a common noun. And Arts International. So tell us about that.
Cyprus College taught me that things about myself that I really didn't like studying. I did not enjoy the theoretical part of learning. And I looked around. I wanted to get into the entertainment industry. I believed genuinely that I was the next Quincy Jones, and I wanted to get into music. And Arts International came up in my search. I was at the British consulate in Oman, and one of the people working there sort of said, "Hey, have you looked at this? It's a residence, and it's a theater school, and it's a television school, and you learn all these different things without books. So I applied. I was the first Arab to ever go to that place. It was up in Yorkshire, in a
I was in the North
small,
End.
yeah, small, tiny town. You probably won't even find it on a map. It's called Bubwith. And I spent 1 year over there, which was probably the most extraordinary year of my personal development and growth. They teach you acting and filming and recording and editing, and then you tour with them in a sort of a traveling theater. And I got to play the role of Joseph K. in Franz Kafka's The Trial. And it was just a great experience. And it wasn't very heavy on the pockets, if you will. My parents could afford it at the time. And I had a lot of friends in England, but they were all living in London. So every few weeks, I'd hop on a train, or I'd catch a ride with someone who was going into London, and I'd hang out with my friends from back home. But it was an extraordinary experience. And unfortunately, that school has shut down now. It's no longer an education center. But to show you what a small world it is, it's been converted into a filming studio, because obviously it was built and equipped that way. And my brother-in-law, he is a film producer in London, and they were there at that same place that I studied in years and years and years ago. And they were filming something and doing some editing work. And it was just all this nostalgia was coming back at me at once when we were doing a Zoom call, and he was showing me the halls and everything that I knew so well. So yeah, Arts International, it actually stood for Advanced Residential Theater and Television Skill Center. So that's where the arts comes from.
Let's talk a little bit about that role you had in the trial, because playing Joseph K., that's the lead role. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, this plays about an individual who is arrested and detained and kind of in secrecy, and he's not really sure why.
That's right. Yeah. It's a very dark role. And I recall the director, his name was Toby at the time. He came to me, I think, a few weeks after I had, because we were doing it twice a day. And after 2 or 3 weeks of playing it, he sat me down. He said, "Look, I think you need to stop, because I think it's really affecting you personally." And it messed me messed me up.
So you're getting method acting on us.
I was, because it's a very dark role. You're accused of something that you never know what it is. And we were doing it twice a day. So you never really had a chance to switch off. You were constantly in that personality. So yeah, I actually still have the script, believe it or not. I've held on to all the scripts that I did that year.
Did that creep up on you? Because I have to imagine that opening night, you were probably incredibly, I don't know, giddy and enthusiastic and going, okay, here's the debut performance. But maybe, I guess, like you said, after a couple of weeks, that's when it started to turn. And did you find that your performance was altered, like after 3 weeks, like you were delivering the scenes maybe a little bit more darker than you were on opening night?
The way this theater school worked, the opening night was maybe a month after you were ready with the dress rehearsal.
Okay.
So you were constantly playing that role. So even by the time opening night came, I was there. I was in it. I was feeling it. I was Joseph. Yeah, it went quite dark for a long period of time for me there. But I still enjoyed the experience thoroughly. It was just a great place to be. And I think it played a big role in my confidence levels today, when I'm asked to get up and present or talk in front of a crowd. I think that education played a vital role in where I am today with myself that way.
I hear you on that part, because I tend to treat my presentations, when I can get back to doing them in person, kind of like a performance.
Yep, absolutely.
Like, you've got certain beats that you try to hit on different slides. I mean, if you're if you're speaking to a crowd, you make sure you're making eye contact with the few people that are going to look at you and not their phones. Although if you're in the theater, I don't think you should have that issue. God, I hope no one was looking at their phones.
Well, you can't really see the audience most of the time, especially in a play like that where everything's super dark.
Very true. What was your first job after college?
So when I got back home from England, I got hired as a junior account executive with an advertising agency in Oman called OHI Advertising. That later became part of DDB. And so today they're called OHI DDB. I had a great manager over there. I'm still in touch with her, and they really pushed and mentored me. It was the agency style, which is very different than what it is today, where the account team is also responsible for their media and their own production. And so you learned all the different aspects and elements of advertising. We'd go spend days at the printers watching them and understanding how the printing process worked. We'd spend time with journalists and the media teams and publishers to understand, what it took to go from a creative concept all the way to being in the newspapers the next day. So I credit a lot of my love for advertising back to that agency, and it was a great experience there.
Did you have any initial interest in getting into advertising? Because that's quite the pivot, going from studying theater and even business before that, and then jumping right into advertising.
So the whole point of the reason I even got in touch with that advertising agency through my friend was I wanted to be involved in the production side of the advertising agency. So I wanted to be working on their television spots and their radio commercials and so on. But my manager, she just found a different role for me to play there. And I'm grateful that she did. So it sort of transitioned into a client servicing role rather than a TV and audio production.
And so your next role, this is where you moved from Oman to Dubai. And
Yes.
what brought you to Euro RSCG?
I got picked up. They got in touch with me when I was working in Oman, and they said, "Listen, we're starting up a new agency, and we're looking for people who speak Arabic and English fluently." And so I packed a suitcase. I didn't have much to put in it, and I moved to Dubai and started working at Euro RSCG, and a very different pace to working in Dubai than it was in Oman. In Oman, you'd have a week to put a print ad together. In Dubai, it was 3 hours. So much faster pace, much more dog eat dog, if you will. And I got to work on accounts like Philips and Danone, a few of those RSCG-based clients that they had. But one of them was Alcatel, which is a mobile phone manufacturer, and I got to work on their business as an account manager. And I just developed a really great relationship with them. And I got a call one day from the boss at Alcatel. He said, "Look, we're looking to hire a manager for marketing for just to run this sort of Middle Eastern region. Do you know anyone that's called Mazen?" And I just said, "Oh my God, I would love this opportunity. That to go from agency side to client side is a goal for a lot of people." And I think it was 8 years that I was at Alcatel, and they moved me around like crazy. I was based out of India for a while. I was living in Morocco, living in Paris. It was an incredible experience with incredible management and mentors and coaches who really wanted you to be the greatest that you can be at your job. And I never looked back. It was just a fantastic experience. And again, like a lot of my jobs, I'm just very fortunate. I'm still in touch with a lot of them that the people that I worked with back then.
Oh, there's a lot to unpack with what you just said. I'm looking forward to this part. No, seriously. So the first one is you were talking a bit about the pace between Oman and Dubai, just working there in general. You said something like 3 hours to get a print ad together versus 5 days or a week in Oman. Was that a lot? Was there an adjustment period there for you, like that kind of pace? Because that's the kind of thing that you can either run with it and adapt, or it can turn you off completely.
you had no choice. If you wanted the job, you had to keep up. That was really the structure of things. And you're working around people who had adjusted to that system. So for them, it became normal. And by the time I joined, it was normal for everybody. So I felt like I was the one complaining for no reason, because for them it was just, hey, whatever, 3 hours, let's get it done. Um, and I when I came to Canada, incidentally, and I know I'm jumping around a bit, but it's Canada isn't as fast as Dubai is. It's faster than Oman, but not as fast as Dubai. Over there, there's the concept of 9 to 5 doesn't really exist. You work till the work is done, then you're done for the day and you go home. So yeah, it's a very different pace, but you don't really have a choice. You adapt to it very, very quickly because it's the normal for everyone.
What about the different countries you worked in for when you were at Alcatel? So you mentioned that you spent time in India, you were in Morocco, you were in Paris. Assuming there were some points that you were doing the same job, but you were then doing it in a different country, how did the role change?
Oh, it's so exciting. I mean, my base was Dubai always. So my partner and my children, they lived in Dubai, and I would be out 3 weeks of the months at times, just moving around the different regions, because I originally was just given the Middle East region, but by the time I left, I was responsible for the entire Africa region, entire Asia region, and parts of Europe. And so you have to go and attend meetings in these countries. You're meeting with ministers of telecommunications, you're meeting with the owners of some of the largest providers in those countries, working with them to understand how are we going to market this particular product, and can we subsidize this phone, and so on. And you take some of the experiences, and you try to adapt them to other countries, but you always have to be very mindful of the cultural differences that exist between different countries. Two countries will never be similar in any way. I, we would go into Cairo, for instance, in Egypt, and we would develop a campaign, and we'd say, this is a great idea. We should use this idea in, let's say, Bangladesh. But then we couldn't, because in Bangladesh, it would have meant something completely different. So we'd have to readapt the campaign without losing the value of the brand and what the brand was trying to represent at the time. And then each country would only select certain types of handsets. So, the countries that, like India, for example, a handset that was less than $50 was a lot more likely to sell than a phone that was $100 or $20, for example. Whereas in Dubai, people wanted the more expensive one. So you really had to learn to adapt between cultures, between what works and what doesn't work from an advertising standpoint. But you also have to maintain that discipline that I am in a different country than I was yesterday. How do I have to behave in front of these partners that we have, or these vendors, or these retailers? It's a great learning experience, I have to say.
You closed out by being the country manager of India. I
Yes.
want to ask you about that. Like, how fast paced was it in India versus Dubai? And the reason I'm singling out India is because I've had a chance to not work with, but I don't know if mentor is the right word, but at least converse with some new Canadians who had come over from India. And
Mhm.
there was one woman in particular I spoke with where she showed me her resume. And I told her, I'm like, you have got to upsell what you're doing in Mumbai. Like, if we in Toronto think that New York City could be scary because it's so much bigger, Mumbai would eat New York for breakfast. And I kept telling her, I'm like, you've got to play up how big and how busy that city is. And I'm not even talking about the country, simply because, as you know, in media, when you've got more people, everything scales upwards. There are more magazines, there's more radio stations, there's more of everything. So it becomes even more difficult for them to do their job because they've got to manage all of these facets that we don't have in Canada, or we do, but on a much more limited scale. So going back to that, how did India compare to, say, Dubai? And I know it wasn't apples to apples completely.
Yeah, it's not a matter of apples to apples. The first thing you have to take into account is the number of official languages that exist in India. So you can never create a campaign and say, okay, we're done. Let's publish this across the country in all the leading newspapers. You have to adapt again. So, we were talking about adapting from Egypt to Bangladesh. When you're living in India, you have to adapt from the north to the south, the east to the west, and then there's a few places in between that need their own creative and what's relevant to them. We looked at Bollywood at one point to say, okay, can we use some influence out of the Bollywood productions? And that became a terrible idea because the movies they were watching, let's say in Kerala, had nothing to do with the movies they were watching up in Gujarat, for example, up in the north. So it again becomes this whole concept of how do I adapt and how do I change? What is relevant to this group of individuals versus this group of individuals? Uh, it's an extraordinary country. You learn a lot about yourself and I was there for almost a year um, in India, and I had an apartment, and I lived a decent life. I won't complain about that at all. But you quickly realize that you need friends anywhere you go that can give you that guidance locally, not just about where to eat, but how to react to different things when people are offering you a service, or people want you to buy into a particular idea that they have. You really have to learn that adaptation across the board with them.
Something you said that blew my mind there about a minute ago was how localized the film industry is in India because we know that native films in India are massive. They outperform Hollywood films, but you tend to think, okay, if they put out a big action film, it's kind of got the same reception nationally as I guess a big Marvel film would have in the United States or even Canada for that matter. And over here, even the film industry isn't really divided. It's kind of like, sure, you've got the French films, but then you've got a lot of the Hollywood films and then a little bit of the independent Canadian films mixed in there as well, trying to Jones for share. But it sounded like there were just certain movies that would not fly in certain regions of India at all. So it made for bad business to just stake everything with one film and hope that gave you the
Absolutely.
reach you needed.
No, you can't do that, and it's because of the different languages. They don't speak the same dialect. They don't. Not everyone in India speaks Hindi, right? They have different dialects, and they're almost completely different languages when you go across the country. So a movie made in one language will not work in another area. The big ones, the mega hits, sure, they might make it across the country, but yeah, when you go to the south of India, which is an incredibly beautiful place, they speak a whole other language than they do, let's say, in Delhi, where I was stationed.
Eventually, though, you would land in Canada, and it was with BE International. So I know we've already touched on your move to Canada a little bit, but give us a bit more information as to, what brought you here, why Canada, and, what you were doing at BE International.
We got to a point. So my partner is from India, which is odd because she wasn't living with me when I was in India. Uh, but I'm Lebanese, she's Indian, and both our children were born in Dubai. And you cannot become a local of Dubai. You're always on a work permit sort of concept. And we were toying with the idea, saying, how much longer can we stay here? We've been here for 10 years. Do we want to stay here forever? What do we want for our children? Do we want this sort of lifestyle? Do we want to rough it out for a bit, but give them something, access to something completely different than what we had? So we put in our immigration papers, and the Canadian one came through, and like a deer in the headlights, if you will. Where do we go from here? Like, where do we live? We don't know anyone in Canada, and truly, we arrived in Toronto on February of 2005. Now, I want you to understand, I've lived in the desert my entire life.
I was about to ask about snow.
And I only had an Adidas sweatshirt that I was wearing, and I showed up in Toronto in a February uh, with two children, a partner, and life just started to happen. We didn't know anyone. We had a phone number of a real estate agent that someone had referenced for us, and that was it. I didn't have a job. I didn't have anything. And I got in touch with BE International. I had met them before back home. And they said, well, we don't have an office in Canada. Why don't you try it, see how it goes and how it works for you? And I'm very grateful to them for that, because you need that bit of a push. But it was late nights, cold calling, getting rejected, turned down by everybody when I was looking for a job. Cold calling people for new leads to sell them the services of BE International. It was a very sales based role, if you will. Um, but yeah, it look at me now, sort of thing. I'm very proud of what we've accomplished since. But we came here with nothing. We didn't know anybody, no friends, no contacts, no relationships, just the number of a real estate agent. And BE International was that sort of uh, cushion that I was able to land on sometimes when things were a bit of a struggle.
I mean, this is your own thing. Like right now, the new name of the company is Aligned Communications, correct?
So Aligned is my own personal company. It doesn't
Okay,
belong to anybody else.
gotcha.
When I moved away from BE International, I decided to set up my own thing as a consulting, and I picked up a couple of other clients that I still have until today. This is since 2005. And they just work with me. They are doing recruitment advertising, so nothing to do with my agriculture marketing world, but more of a recruitment consulting service for international media buying. But that's what the transition of BE International came. But yeah, I got a job, I think 4 years after being in Canada. 4 years of rejections and four
Oh,
years of you don't
geez.
have 4 years of you don't have Canadian experience responses. I finally got a job at Padulo, and they gave me a break to become an account director there, and that really got me going with local work and local brands and just the local process of doing work.
What advice could you give to new Canadians when they hear the same line that is, you don't have enough or any Canadian experience? Because I think there should be a lot of stock put into what you were doing in Dubai, and especially what you were doing in India, Morocco, and elsewhere.
It's a very tricky question, right? And I know a lot of people are asking for it to be stopped. Um, some of those recruiters that said those words to me are today calling me and asking me if I'd like to join one of their clients. This is what I used to do. If I went on a website and the website said, "We are a diverse organization, we will hire you because of your skills, nothing else," then I would bring that up when they say you don't have enough Canadian experience. It didn't do anything. It didn't get me the job offer, but I'd make it a point to say, then stop telling people on your website that you don't think about these things, because clearly you do. What I would say to newcomers is you're going to get a lot of no's, but every now and then you'll get a yes. Those yeses will change your life. Those yeses, you should value them. Get a coach, get a mentor, get involved in these local associations that are made in this country for newcomers. I've been fortunate enough to mentor and speak at a number of these associations, which are just immigrants helping immigrants. And there's a lot of great value that one can get from there. So I always say, don't be shy. Take your ego out of the picture completely. Go and attend these association meetings, because they can give you a lot of great value. You may not realize that your resume is built incorrectly for the Canadian um, hiring space. We built our resumes back home in a very different method than people build them here. But I didn't know that till I started speaking to different immigrant communities that were able to help and guide me a little bit. So I would always say, speak to people who are from the associations and these immigrant support programs, because they can bring a lot of value to your life that you never knew that was missing.
I want to ask you about the resume. You brought that up, and the reason I say that is that earlier on I had mentioned that there was a woman who had approached me. She had just come over from India about just over a year ago, and she had the chance to interview for a job that I had posted, and she got in touch with me about it, and we spoke. And I remember she was pitching me herself, and then I'm looking at her resume on my other monitor at the same time. It was a video call, and I said to her, "I go, everything you just said to me isn't in here."
Yeah.
And the advice that I gave her was is that if you've been working on big global companies in India, you got to put those brand names in your resume. Like she had left out like Coca-Cola. I think
Right.
Pfizer was in there too. And I said to her, I go, that's the kind of stuff that's going to get people's attention. Is that something that you would recommend to new Canadians as well? Is that, hey, if you've got anything that might be relatable to what we're doing here, even if it's just the name like Coca-Cola or something that you worked on, drop that in your resume?
I always tell them to list them out as much as possible, because these resume filtering platforms that exist on many sites today are looking for keywords, right? It's the
Yes.
SEO, if you will. So it's almost resume SEO that you have to look into. So I always tell them, absolutely, make sure that you're listing all these things. Use a certain format. Try to use only one color. Take your picture out. Remove your date of birth, because these are things that we may have had back home, but they don't use that format over here. Don't spend 3 pages writing about your education, because no one ever asks about it over here. Focus on the work experience, your last 3 jobs or the last 5 years of your life. Those are the influences that will get you noticed or not.
And so this brings us full circle. And so what brought you to WS Worldwide? And, did the role find you or did you find the role?
It was a bit of both. A recruiter called me and they said, "Look, we have a company out in Calgary, and they don't have anyone in Toronto, but they'd like to hire an account director." I said, "You know what? I'll talk to them. Why not?" I was starting to look around. I was interested in a move, and I spoke to the founders, Jeff and Susan, and we hit it off. We got along really, really well. And I think it was a matter of a few weeks later, they flew me out to Calgary. I met a few people on the team. We continued the interviews. And it was a very comfortable feeling between the two of us. And I felt like I can trust them. And they were giving me that vibe that they trusted me. And you can see that when you look at them and you talk to them, you understand that their vision is way beyond just this one office for advertising. They had much bigger plans. They had much bigger dreams. And I remember I came back to Toronto and the recruiter called me. She said, "Look, I've got 2 job offers for you. The first one's from WS, the other one's from another agency. Let's not bring them up now." And she said, "Almost the same. Which one do you want to pick?" And I just said WS in a heartbeat. I said, I really want to join these guys. And so I accepted the job as an account director. I was the only one living in Toronto, and all of them were out of Calgary at the time. And after a while, I think we all noticed that it was really hard to be part of the client servicing team when I'm not right there in the office talking with the creative and the production at the same time. And they had an idea. They said, "Look, you have a lot of experience in media. Do you want to take on the media? We don't have a media team internally, but we'd like to." And so I became a media manager for them and then grew that into a media director. COVID hit, and suddenly we're recruiting from all across the country. The company has been growing tremendously over the years. We have someone out of Winnipeg. We have quite a few people out of Toronto now. Someone's out of British Columbia, a few out of Calgary. So it's become a lot easier almost for someone to be a part of a company today that may not be in the same city of that you reside in. And I've stuck with them. I took a year off just to learn a few things in the digital space that I felt I was lacking in. But when I called them back up and I said I'm ready to come home, and there was no question about it, I just walked right back in. as the media director, and they gave me some more responsibilities. And yeah, it's just I'm happy. I'm in a good space, and the agriculture industry is growing and booming, and there's a lot to learn, not just about crops, but about the landscape and the soils and how we're going to try to feed the whole world. It's a very exciting place to be.
Was it challenging trying to build a department and a team remotely?
No, it really wasn't. Again, it comes down to the ownership and the vision that they have. When they give you all the tools and they say, "Look, we're not going to be asking you questions day and night. You want this, you figure it out, you make it happen, we'll support you." And that's really been the attitude towards all the new initiatives. The companies now involved in an artificial intelligence company that is helping cats become a lot healthier and happier in their lives. It's called Sylvester. We're setting up all these different smaller organizations around us. So and you can't do that if your only vision is we have problems and we cannot grow. If that's your logic and your thinking, you're not going to get anywhere. So instead, the founders have said, look, here's the money, go make it happen, and we'll support you, we'll back you up, tell us what the idea is, and we're there with you. Yeah, so it hasn't been hard. It really hasn't. It's as much trouble as COVID has given us over the years, from a professional standpoint, for me at least, I'm very grateful for it. It's been good.
I guess then you still have recent hires or new teammates that you brought on that you probably haven't met in person then.
Oh my goodness, there's so many of them. But you feel you've gotten to know them. We spend a lot of time, effort, and money on company culture because we truly want to make it a very inclusive workspace that we have. So we spend a lot of time talking and joking and laughing, and we have a lot of company events. But I remember over the holidays last year, a few of us got together here in Ontario, and you're sort of looking at them saying, "Oh my God, that's so weird to be looking at this person suddenly in real life versus behind a computer screen." But yeah, it's very exciting, and the time will come where we all get to sit together and have a laugh and joke together in person. But the attitude is so positive that we're ready to do whatever it takes to make it a positive experience for everyone. So culture has been a big thing at our agency.
You're also taking all of your knowledge and experience and you're putting it to work for students and you're doing teaching at George Brown College. What course are you teaching there?
It was a marketing and communications course for advertising. There's someone who the industry knows really well, and I'm going to credit her with all of this. Her name is Tracy Bull, and I'm sure you know her,
Oh,
Victor.
I know Tracy Ball. She's been on this podcast.
Yes. So Tracy said to me something. I actually took her programmatic course with the IAB.
I've taken that course too. It's a wonderful course.
And she's just a brilliant mind that one can, I can spend hours listening to her. And she actually took me aside and she said, if you want to grow and if you want to do better things, you've got to get more involved. Volunteer your time where possible. Try to do some teaching. And so I took all these things and then I became an independent member of the IAB, and I'm now chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Task Force. I jumped in with the Ad Club of Toronto, and I've volunteered with Digital Day, and I took on this gig with George Brown. It was one course just to listen to the way these students think and how fresh their ideas can be and how powerful their minds are was a great eye opener for me. I enjoyed teaching that course thoroughly. Unfortunately, because of schedules, it's hard to keep doing it throughout the year. But it's certainly somewhere where I want to go back, um, to doing it when possible. But I really encourage everyone to try to do that on in areas that they feel that they can contribute. Volunteer with an organization in advertising. The industry needs it. Try teaching. And I remember I went off track completely with the curriculum that I was given, because I called the professor. I said, the head professor. I said, look, Danny, I need to tell these kids what programmatic advertising is. It's so necessary for them when they leave school to know what this concept is. And he said, do it. Very open-minded, and I really enjoyed doing that. And I'm still in touch with all the students on LinkedIn, and it's wonderful.
You know what programmatic advertising needs? It needs some sort of, I don't know, demo platform. One where you can go into it with fake money and fake ads and a fake exchange, and you can actually learn on the go. That's the one gripe I have with programmatic, that the best way to learn is on the job, but in order to do that, you need to do it with someone else's budget.
Yeah, and there was a sandbox at the time where you can go in and dabble with these things. I don't know if it still exists or not, but a lot of the DSPs are making it available, for newbies to play in a little bit. So I agree with you that there's a lot more that we can be doing for it. But I think at the core, anyone coming out of college today in an advertising credit should understand the basics of it at least.
Maz, this has been fantastic. Are you ready for rapid fire questions?
Let's do this.
All right. The campaign you are most proud of.
Impossible to answer. I've enjoyed my career in advertising. I've had campaigns that have won awards, campaigns that really should have won awards. From doing an ad in Oman to Dubai to India to Morocco to Paris to working on campaigns in this great country. I cannot pinpoint one campaign that says this is the best one I've done. I've done a ton of great ones.
All right, I won't push you because that's like asking you to pick your favorite child. All right, your favorite movie?
Snatch. That Guy Ritchie movie. I've enjoyed all of his movies, but there are just some of those movies that when they come on television, no matter where they are in timing, you'll just sit and watch them. Snatch is one of them. I like a few of the old comedies like Airplane, anything by Mel Brooks. I probably memorized all his movies as well. But
You got to be a Spaceballs fan.
Yeah, I huge Spaceballs and Blazing Saddles. My goodness, just hilarious.
Snatch, though, I mean, Brad Pitt's unrecognizable in it. Like I can't understand anything he's saying. And even the way he changes the shape of his body too, and he drops his shoulders and his face, you kind of have to do a double take and go, it looks like a real roughed up, malnourished version of Brad Pitt.
It's a great film, just really well written.
You know what I like about Guy Ritchie? He's getting back to those films with The Gentleman because he deviated a little bit and tried to do something more mainstream with like Aladdin and King Arthur, and even God, what was it again? Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, no, I'm more of the Snatch, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. That's sort of genre of his movies.
British gangster films. Did you pick that up when you were living over there?
Pretty much, yeah. I understand them a lot. So.
Your favorite play or musical? And I threw this question in specifically for you. No one else gets this question.
So I can't say The Trial by Franz Kafka because I'd lose a lot of friends on that one. I didn't. It wasn't very long ago since probably the last few plays that I got to watch, and I watched the Book of Mormon, which I just found was brilliant. The cast, the energy, the chemistry. It was just a really feel-good kind of play. I enjoyed it thoroughly.
When you were living in England and you made it down to London as frequently as you did you go to West End plays?
A few. I don't even know if I can recall most of them, but one we had to because it was part of the course to go and attend as many as possible. Two, we all had student passes, so we can get in dirt cheap. We didn't have to pay the heavy prices that other ticket holders had to pay. But yeah, we got to watch quite a few of them. None of the big ones that eventually became really big, like The Lion King or Hamilton. There weren't any at my time when I was studying there that had that sort of reach and appeal.
Even if the play or the musical isn't that appealing, all of those theaters in the West End are works of art. It's almost like you just want to go to take them in.
They are, and they all have so much history inside of them. If you do love theater, it is a place to be for sure.
Your favorite video game?
Oh, no brainer. FIFA, Gran Turismo. My son's taken my PlayStation, so I don't really get to play as much as I used to. And with the work schedules that we have, it's a little harder to do these days. But I've always enjoyed a good game of FIFA, and I love my racing. I play Formula One, but I've always preferred Gran Turismo because there's a bit of a rally aspect
Yes.
to it.
Oh, are you going to be getting Gran Turismo 7? Because I was just watching. I don't know if you're familiar with Jimmy Broadbent on.
I am.
Yeah,
Yeah,
He was doing a live stream earlier today of
yeah.
debuting it, and I was looking at that, going, you
The
have to shake your
graphic,
head a little bit and go, no, that's a video game.
yeah, the graphics are incredible on that game.
If Hollywood were to make a movie based on your life story, who would you want to play you?
Well, I'd like to think this is a great opportunity for Idris Elba, let's say, to improve his portfolio of movies. No, I really don't like. I know Idris Elba was born in the same year as I was, so that's why I think of Idris Elba. And I use his image as an example when I'm talking to audiences about building a persona. Be careful, because Idris and I were born on the same day and we both like movies, but we're nothing alike whatsoever. So be careful how you're building your personas. But yeah, I'll pick Idris Elba. I think he'd make me look really good.
I think he's got the range for it.
Oh my goodness, do you think?
If Hollywood were to make that movie based on your life story, what would you call it?
This too shall pass. Yeah, it's life is not easy, and I'm not saying mine is harder than anybody else's out there, but I've put myself through situations to be a better person, to do better for my kids, do better for my community. I've tried a lot of things, and sometimes you're gonna be given those obstacles, and I've had to endure them. Um, Being an immigrant in this country and having your family back home and losing loved ones, it's a lot, and it's an emotional roller coaster. So I would say this too shall pass, because eventually you move on.
Your favorite book?
Oh, I wish I was reading a lot more than I am. I really, and I'm ashamed to say it, I haven't read a book in a long time. But I'm a big fan of thrillers, these mystery thriller kind of, um, Clancy's and Robert Ludlum's and the likes of that. Those are sort of my genre of books that I enjoy.
Your favorite song?
So in the scope of a day, because I've always got music playing, I will go from reggae to heavy metal to hip hop, and then maybe to thrash metal in one day. I do not have a song that I prefer, nor a genre that I would always listen to. I'm a mixed bag of music, and there's always something playing in the background for me. I've been to millions of concerts. Music is an absolute passion, and has been a constant positive place in my life forever. So I cannot pinpoint one song. Sorry.
It's
It's
all
not.
good, but that's still quite the range. That's for
Yeah.
sure. Your favorite podcast, and you do not have to say this one.
There's a whole bunch of them. So I like the Formula One, of course. There's a few great sports podcasts. I like Today Explained. It as a podcast, it really helps me organize some of my thoughts about what's happening in the world today. 90% Invisible. I know it's quite a popular one, and I do try to listen to it every now and then. There's some great content out there. It's fascinating how great, how all these great content creators like yourself are giving a lot of information to people to know and to improve. It's a really brave thing to do.
Well, thank you for the kind words. I do have another podcast, though, to add to your list. You mentioned the Formula One podcast. I assume that's
Yeah.
Beyond the Grid.
Yes.
Have you checked out Bring Back V10s by the race?
I think I saw you write something about that somewhere. I haven't. I
Oh,
will check it out though.
I'm telling you, if you want to relive basically, I want to say 1990 to 2005, the guys at the Race Media are doing a phenomenal job of bringing together certain people that might have had a hand in a very specific time. Like, I'll give you a really good one if you want to kick off one.
Yeah.
Nigel Mansell, returning to Formula One in '95 full time with McLaren, which, as you know, did not turn out to be full time at all. And
not
there
a
were
good
even
year.
rumors that Nigel couldn't fit into the car.
Yeah.
If you start with that one, it's the episode that keeps giving. You keep listening to it going, really, that happened too?
I will check that one out for sure.
I'll send you a link to it after. It's fantastic. You'll get addicted to it.
Perfect.
The best advice you have ever received.
Nobody owes you a damn thing. You want it, you earn it. I think so many different people have said that to me throughout my life as a child. My parents used to say it to me. My coaches said it to me. A couple of teachers said it to me. And after a while, I started to feel, hey, am I behaving like an entitled person? But really, it stuck with me. I expect nothing from anyone. No one owes you a damn thing. So if anyone helps you, anyone's good to you, just be really grateful to it because they don't owe you anything.
If you could go back in time and give your younger self advice, what would you say?
Everything that hits you along the way, and I'm trying to be mindful of the language that I'm using, but everything that hits you along the way is really going to fuel that next step of your life. All the hardships, all those obstacles, they mean something. They'll make you stronger. They'll help you make much more informed decisions. So it's okay. Suffer a little bit, cry when you need to. You're going to lose a lot of battles, but just keep going because you won't make the same mistake again.
My signature closing question. If you weren't in media, what would you be doing and why?
I'd be the next Quincy Jones, man. So I have this commitment to music and I always wanted to be in the music industry. I thought I could be a producer. I thought I could be a songwriter as well at one point in my life. I genuinely believe if I hadn't walked into that advertising agency, not that I regret it, but if I had not walked into that advertising agency, eventually I would have walked into a music studio and I'd be there right now.
Maz, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
That's it for today's show. For more episodes, you can go to mediapeople.ca or subscribe wherever you get podcasts. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram @VicGenova.